So one of the crucial points here is, as I mentioned before, everything can be skipped, and each point and changes on each point is well documented in this README. It's quite extensive, including deployment process and changes to manifest and possible issues here. And what else? You can also watch the history of commits of this repository. So if you can see the last step, step 8 initial commit, it took the entire new files in the folder. And then step 8 update, it's changes to this folder. So it's changes of from the Azure Store from the service bus queue to the service bus topic, changes to the manifest, and etc. So it's easy to track. So it's step 6 initial commit and step 6 deeper update. So you can do whatever you like and whenever you like, and can return to any step of this workshop later on to check for the changes and to implement it at your own solution. But overall flow, as I mentioned before, it's a happy path from the Microsoft. How to start working with containerized applications and migrate them between services when your solution and project grows and require more and more complexity and attention. So with this said, let's continue to the step number 1. Step number 1 is the infrastructure. The easiest way to deploy our infrastructure is to just copy paste it from GitHub. But one important note, as you can see, I'm getting the subscription ID by querying the name of the subscription. My subscription name contains name Microsoft. So essentially, I'm checking if it's a correct one, and then doing the AZ show. So if I will copy paste just the first 4 rows, I will open the Azure portal. As you can see, some components already deployed, but you shouldn't worry about copy pasting and running the script, because I'm using the random postfix, and the newly deployed infrastructure will have this postfix just with different name. And we will see this in a minute. So we open in the Azure command line. We're using the bash, not PowerShell. Then we just copy pasting these 4 rows. And we doing right click with paste, or you can do just Ctrl-Shift-V and clicking enter. As you can see, subscription ID should be the correct one, because the name is Microsoft Azure sponsorship, so everything is okay. We can proceed with just copy pasting entire script. While we copy pasted it, we pasting it with Ctrl-Shift-V into the console, and the deployment is underway. While deployment is underway, I would briefly explain what's going on here. So we have a SQL Server with 2 databases in Elastic Cluster. It's the most expensive resource here, and you can later on downgrade them to individual databases to S0, or just delete them to stop consuming money, because you will deploy the script as many times as you like. There is an output of the connection strings and some replacements here, but this connection strings would be at the end output of entire script execution. Then we proceeding with AKS infrastructure. We creating a resource group, we creating a new cluster, and we creating private container registry with identity to assign, so we can authenticate it with our Kubernetes cluster. Then we enabling add-ons for our Kubernetes cluster, and then deploying the service bus queue. We're not creating any topic here, because later on with Dapper we will switch to the topic, and this topic would be created automatically, and we will have a look at this. So it's service bus connection string would be output of our deployment also. Then we create an application insights instance and getting this instrumentation key. Instrumentation key is a legacy approach and will be deprecated in favor of connection strings, but for the sake of brevity, we're using the instrumentation key here. So it's Azure Container Instances. We're just preparing the group here for the deployment, because we will deploy everything regarding container instances at the step of container instances, because you preparing deployment by referencing the container that already shipped to the private container registry. And so then we're deploying container apps. With container apps, we deploy log analytics workspace for logs. And we create an only environment at the moment, because we will create application where we will be deploying our solution from Visual Studio. But if you want to, you can easily uncomment this section and do the container app deployment if you want to, and if you already have the image name and authenticated container registry. Then we add in Azure Key Vault. Additional and extensive configuration for our application is out of the scope of this workshop for simplicity. You can find all the changes for referencing Key Vault and adding this data in my other repositories. And as the last step, we would output everything to set local secrets. So it will be setx command, so all the secret strings would be added to your local environment. And let's switch back to our Azure deployment. It's still deploying, but as I mentioned, I have deployed the initial version already. And while you can see that container landscape cluster without postfix already deployed several days ago, the new cluster is deploying at the moment. But let's see on the entire deployment. So we have a container land cluster, container landscape registry. We have the data group with two databases and database pool. We have our container app environment here and log analytics workspace. We have extras folder. Extras folder contains the key vault, service bus namespace, and application insights. And we have group container land instances, where as you can see already, where we have already deployed one of the instances. Our infrastructure is still deploying, and last but not least, there is additional auto-generated group for our Azure Kubernetes cluster. It's called MC Container Land Cluster something else Europe, but it's auto-generated name. Essentially, we have a network security group, public IP address, virtual machine scale set, and virtual network here. Also managed identity for our container registry and load balancer. One thing here is that you can connect your virtual network from this group to your Azure SQL Server to avoid issues with authentication. As I mentioned, I don't have a goal to take several hours to work on every step of this workshop. My goal is to do the overview so you can experiment for yourself, because it was a huge work to prepare everything for you as a step-by-step solution. So let's open the local containers quickly. For local containers, it's super simple and straightforward. It's monolithic solution for the moment, because usually it's easier to start with monolithic solution and then do the kind of split. You can observe split on the later steps. But so far we have two controllers, order and delivery controller and startup file. What I have done previously here, I just use it, add new components and add the Docker, add container orchestration and add Docker. So if you added container orchestration, you will have a Docker compose file here. And if you added the Docker, you would have a Docker file in the root of your project. You can probably have one issue with containerization from Visual Studio. It's the naming of the steps in the Docker file. So if you would not have this string from build as publish, you would experience a lot of issues, and sometimes Visual Studio will not generate this Docker file properly for you. So be aware that each step in the Docker file should reference previous one. So it's a from build as publish, because this is step build. So from this step we continue to this step. It's one moment, and as I mentioned, everything is documented. So essentially on the empty solution you will need just add the Docker support and container orchestration support, like on the screenshot inside the GitHub repository. One important moment is to not forget to switch from the debug on the local solution on your project to the Docker Compose, because otherwise you would have an error and spend some time to figure out what's wrong. Regarding services, just a brief overview. They will change significantly and evolve. But they created for simplicity. So we have an order service when we're receiving the order, and we're using for the moment HTTP client factory, and we're doing everything in a dummy way without database. Database we will connect on the step with container apps. So here we just doing simulating create new delivery for order, and create new delivery actually call another controller here, but we call in another controller here by the name of this container. So it will be easy to locate it by the known name inside the Docker Compose. As you can see, Docker Compose knows that there is a tpaper orders service. So it will be located, and we not using HTTPS at the moment. So switching back here, all changes are explained here. So we change it from the direct port and localhost to the tpaper orders IT. So switching back here, switching back to orders controller, it's a simple HTTP request, and we will receive a dummy response without real ID numbers and etc. Real ID numbers would be on step 4, when you will get connection to your database and where you can get outputs of everything that you created. We can switch back quickly to the Azure portal and see that something is still deploying here. So we don't yet have our outputs of secrets. And don't worry, before the publishing of this content, I will delete everything. So these secrets will be no use. So switching back, so if you need to start this application locally, just do the Docker Compose and everything will run smoothly. It will be always the same output because now we're not connected to the database and no real IDs are generated. So we can close this down and stop our solution and proceed to the next step. And so we gradually move into the step with container instances. As it documented here, essentially you need to do the AZ login, AZ account show, and authenticate to your container registry to build and ship your container. So to do this, we can just open the command prompt from the correct step, the step 3 container instances, and then do the AZ login. It will open the new browser window in your default browser, which for me will be this one. I will select this account and close it down. So as you can see, we authenticated to Microsoft Azure sponsorship. That is the correct name of the subscription. And meanwhile, we got our outputs from the command line below, which we would need to save somewhere. So we used the Notepad++, the favorite developer tool, and we just need to remove extra commentary here. Removing this extra commentary this way, set X. As I mentioned before, I'm deployed the new environment with the postfix. So all the commands and all other things should be used with the correct postfix from your deployment. As you can see, the postfix is added after the command, and the name of the instances and etc. name it as 1983. So we can skip this for now, and then just follow our guide and do the AZ account show. Essentially, it's already displayed here, but you always need to double check this and do the Azure Container Registry login. While it's logging in, following the next step is super easy because you need to open the solution itself. So let's open the SLN file. And when we open this solution, we need to do the rebuild of it and prepare a new container here. Yes, I'm enjoying the Visual Studio, obviously. And yes, we need to switch to Docker Compose here and just do the rebuild. Rebuild will rebuild the container, and while it's rebuilding, we can switch back. It's already completed. We can switch back to the command line and our tutorial. So with our tutorial, we need to check what kind of Docker images we have. It's a wrong command, obviously, Docker images. So Docker images, we have a lot of them, and we need and we have a dev container built 11 minutes ago, but we don't need really a dev container. We need a release container, and we need to do a rebuild solution to have a release one, and we need to slightly adjust what we have here. In the tutorial we have a version 1 of the container, but now we have tpaperOdus latest, built 3 weeks ago during the first take on this repository. Actually, then we do the Docker tag and Docker images and push container to the container registry and see the output table of the container registry. We can double check it right away, so we would not wait for anything. To connect to our registry, and we can see that we have a tpaperOdus. It only shows the particular repository, not the versions of container for this repository. For this we have a different command. As I mentioned, you need to create a service principal, and this service principal really should be created for the newly deployed infrastructure, and for this you should do the Ctrl+Shift+V here, but you need to update your postfix. So postfix is 983 here. So we set in but it's 983 to our variable that we have in our repository description, and with this name we can create a registry principal. So its registry principal can have also this postfix 983. Am I correct? Yes, I'm correct. And this way we can generate our password and username to authenticate to our container registry. So we can deploy everything that we have. So just copy pasting this and putting this to the Azure. So yeah, now you see the secrets. After a few minutes, yes, this output includes credentials that you must protect, but it will be deployed soon enough. So we have a principal ID here, and we have a service principal password that we can use to deploy our container instance application. The thing is, with container instances, it's quite limited, and it's not intended for massive scale and etc. So if you have, as I mentioned before, it's for simple cases. If you have one or two containers or one container with a sidecar, if you want to use container instances placement groups, then you can deploy it at will. So as mentioned in this tutorial, I removed some secrets from here, but it's not that important because it will be deleted. We can also get a login server, but essentially your login server it's the name of your registry where you will be able to authenticate. And so then we can create in our resource group Containerland instances, new Containerland Azure Container Instance, and reference container deployed to our group. But the thing is, we not yet deployed it because we authenticated the different container registry at the moment, but it's not that important. So with this command and the password generated for you on the previous step, you can safely deploy your infrastructure. Just let me copy paste it, put it to our super secret file, and we will deploy this in a second. So for this we need to check a few things. First, we have to have the new image. For this I started the docker images command. As you can see, the tpaper orders latest was created in release mode 5 minutes ago. So with this being said, we need to switch back to our GitHub and check what's changed in terms of our authentication to Azure Container Registry. So we need to do the ACR login to the Containerland registry, but with different name. So with different name, it should be something from our secret. And from our secret, it's 983. So we just adding it here. Okay, login succeeded, and then we need to, according to our tutorial, just tag our container. So newly built tpaper orders latest, we will tag it with proper container registry name, which in our case should be 983. So it's container registry 983 paper orders 1. It's super important to tag your container with the name of proper container registry that you authenticated. Yep, and we can do the docker images, and we'll see that we have the properly Containerland registry 983 paper orders tagged containers, and then we will need to slightly adjust our deployment script, but first we need to just push it to the remote, so it will be like this, and with the same update of 983. So we hit an enter, and see that our container is pushed to the container registry. Give it a second. Yes, it's over there. For the sake of brevity, I'm mentioning again that I will not be doing each and every step, because they are quite self-explanatory, and I will do the most interesting part here. So we can do the list. Essentially, we've done the password thing, and what we need to do is to slightly adjust this command so we can deploy our application. So, but before we deploy our application, we can close down this output because we saved all the secrets here. And if you will switch back to the resource groups, do the refresh, and we have this instances group with previously deployed container container instances, and we have a new group without any deployment here, so it will be a fair play. So I copy pasted the command, and what I need to do is to check the correctness of the names. So the container length instances is 993. Let it be also different name, 983 of the ACI itself. Then we need to switch name of the registry to 983 also. We have a container v1, we will have one CPU and 1 GB of memory. And now it's interesting part, because we need to adjust this command for the login server. It's Azure Container Instances login server here, and registry username and registry password. And we will switch DNS also, DNS name here. So we need to use this ID as service principal to deploy our application registry username here, and the password is over here. So quite straightforward and quite easy. It's registry password, yes. And we have the deployment string. Let's do the deployment. Let's do the deployment thing. You can do this from our local CMD or from the Azure portal. It's not that important. And while it's deploying and everything would be set up, let's follow our output. So you can monitor deployment of the container instances with the following commands, and you can check the logs and see the outputs from our logs quickly. The thing is, the application itself, if you will follow it step by step with changes, there is a wrong URL. There is a internal, there was committed initial error was with the reference name inside the string URL. Now it is the latest version and it should be fixed. Let us quickly check. It's order controller, and no, it haven't been checked in. It's good actually, because we need to rebuild the container and push it again so our application will work. So as you can see, we're using here the real name of our application deployed to Azure. So I can open this solution. It's good that I kept it in the wrong way. So you would have to do some changes following the guide inside the README file. So I changed it here. And if you would see our deployment result, it actually deployed and working properly, but it will be error 500 when I try to reach out our application with the URL to query and create order. So So if you will open our container registry name here and add the 983, we would get 404 because obviously there is a different URL here. But if we open Visual Studio Launch settings, we can find our API order create path, add it here and execute, and we get a nice 500 error. This 500 can be observed with the commands from the tutorial, as I mentioned, so it's super easy to figure out what's going on. But don't believe me, just believe your eyes. So AZ container logs, it can be also connected to the, let's do it from the portal. You can also connect this to Azure's Log Analytics or Azure Application Insights. So with this being said, let me do the abort, and as you know, we have a slightly different names here. So it's a 983 and 983. If we can see the container logs, we can see the exception in there. Yes, and we can see detailed exception, so paper orders 80 is not known. So it's this approach is can be used for each and every step of this workshop. If something don't work, it's because you need to be following exact instructions on the GitHub. So switching back to Visual Studio, we see that we changed this in our order controller with the proper URL. And with the proper URL change, we need just to rebuild it. And our rebuild is done. So we need to check Docker images first. We see the latest build 34 seconds ago. We need to tag container with v2. Then we will need to push our container Docker push to our registry and change the version to v2. Layer already exists, just the changes push it there. Completed, and then we will need to redeploy our app. But to redeploy our app, we need to just click up and down to find our command. Then we can just hold the left button to navigate to our paper orders v2. And here we replacing v1 with v2. Oops. Sorry for this. I should hit end. And our deployment is complete, and we can switch to the browser and quickly navigate to our endpoint, and as you can see, it's working. Now we're switching fast forward to the container apps and container apps with Dapr essentially. So I will deploy and initialize our container app and switch to the Dapr step because we don't have much time. I hope you're already familiar with the solution. So I will show the changes that we have here. So skipping to the container apps, we will use Dapr components to switch to the Azure Service Bus queue for inter-service communication. So we opening step 5 container apps. We opening the solution here and continue to following steps, but let me just briefly mention what's happened here. Our solution is split it into on the step 4 for container instances multi-container group. So we have, if you will follow the step 4 information, you will have the same application with 2 services, tpaper orders and tpaper delivery. We already have a SQL Server connected to our both projects. You can run locally if you applied the local secrets and restarted your machine. So sometimes the path variable is required this. We have a startup with injection of the local environment variable passwords here. We also have controllers in different projects here, and order controller on the step 5 using the same HTTP client factory, but it uses the delivery URL secret. Delivery URL secret will be the name of your container app instance. And with this being said, let's start with our deployment of the container apps. The hint is the first deployment of the container app by default should fail for you, because there will be lack of the secret assigned. But explanation on how to assign the secrets is shown here. To speed up things, you should do the following interesting part. You should open your SQL Server. So let's open it in any group, container-land data. You can connect the SQL Server and this description inside the README. You can connect it with VNet, with networking settings, with your Kubernetes cluster and container app, or the IP address of your Kubernetes cluster or container app dedicated one, or you can allow to access entire range. So if you can add a virtual networking rule and use your VNets from your Kubernetes here. You can also add VNets for the container apps, but this is kind of advanced scenario. As I mentioned, you can add a firewall rule, just essentially allowing all, and it will start with 000, the mask, and end with range 255, 255, 255, 255. Essentially, it's allow all rule. And let's save it. And we don't need at the moment CMD line, so it's a save it, and it can be accessed by any IP address. So this will allow you to use SQL Server at will. So let's deploy our services. So we will open the paper delivery, select publish. And as you can see, there is a wrong name of the container registry, and everything is wrong here. So we need to add new publish profile. So we need publication to Azure Cloud, yes, specific target, and it will be Azure Container Apps Linux. There is no support for Windows containers now. There are no container instance now deployed. So we selecting our container land container app here, and we using container apps environment North Europe that we created before. Container name tpaper delivery, because we deploying tpaper delivery service, and we creating the new Azure Container App for this service. So it will be 2 Azure Container Apps, because it's a rule of thumb to deploy each container app to the dedicated service. And as we can see, it's already created. Then we hit next and selecting the container registry from which we will be populating our application. It's quite important moment here, because different registry can contain different versions of containers. I will use for this step container land registry without postfix. And next, publish file. But you can also set up CI/CD GitHub actions and work with your application in production with easiest possible way. And with this created, we can select a proper one. It's container land Azure Container Instances IO. And when we will hit publish here, it will build our project and it will deploy it. So we can see this publish profiles over here. So as you can see, the new tpaper delivery app is created recently. It's also visible via changes to the Git. Here is the one. It's paper delivery app. So everything is correct. We can hit publish. As you can see, it published successfully. Now we can do this the same process for the T-paper orders, but on the first publish we will create in Azure Container App. But on the second publish we will add secrets to this container app, so it can work with secrets, and so it can work with SQL instance and use configured value to connect to the configured value to connect between services. One important point here is that when we need to create a new container app, so we would have a T-paper delivery app and T-paper orders. So one container app per service, and these container apps can be deployed in the same container app environment. If we will briefly switch back to our browser, you can see that T-paper delivery is deployed and running, but it doesn't mean that our services can communicate with each other, unfortunately, because to communicate you need to add application settings to both of the servers, because you need to add communication settings to both services, as explained in this tutorial. You should get a proper URL of the application and allow to make unsecure connections with HTTP allowed. Let's do the switch. So we need to set up ingress. We will back into the resource group, opening the container app that we have here. As you can see, T-paper delivery is here. Yeah, we checking our Dapper components would be located inside the environment, because it's essentially environment. It's the same virtual network and same namespace. So we switch in here, and we open in ingress. And here is allow insecure connections. We're saving this while our T-paper orders is already created. So we hit next, select the container registry, this one, and generate publish file. Profile is being created, but we cannot navigate yet because it's still updating. Here configuration can take some time. Publish profile already created for us, and we need to do the actual publishing. So we do the publish now, and after the publish we will add the secrets, and this would be like initial step completion for the container apps. I will briefly mention how to add and switch Dapper, what kind of changes on the next step, but we will switch back to the AKS, and the step with switching, adding and switching pub/sub components. So we will switch off so we would switch off from the Azure Service Bus to RabbitMQ. Publish and succeeded, and hopefully configuration is saved here. Yes, it is saved. We would refresh. Yes, we have our T-paper order and we have T-paper delivery. So we switch in here, refreshing this one. So while we refresh it, it was not visible, but now it's visible. We can see T-paper orders here. And what's important here is that you get the site URL here, and this site URL is opening in the browser. So you have exact names of your application. We would briefly switch to ingress and make it HTTP allowed, insecure connections allowed. while it's updating, we can have a quick look into the code. So we can see the order controller here, and we see that this delivery URL section. Essentially, delivery URL, it's the URL of your container app, and as explained inside the step, you should get a delivery URL and set and as you can see here, you can add this URL to environment variable in Docker env file. Docker env file located here in settings environment, and it's referenced in the Docker Compose. Docker Compose is quite different at the moment, so it have two services here, and both of them using the same settings env file. Settings env file is essentially your configuration and secrets that will be used when you run your several services. And delivery URL inside the Docker, it will be tpaper delivery port 80. But for our cloud environment, we should use delivery URL secret. So delivery URL secret would be this URL, but copy pasted from the deployment of tpaper delivery. So let us switch to the tpaper delivery, to the tpaper orders, because we need it here. So it's a publish. And here you can see manage container app settings. So we add in settings here. The name of this app setting is delivery URL, and the value, this is tpaper delivery app. This is the first one. Then we need to add few more secrets. Few more secrets, it's the secrets that we copy pasted from our output. So it's a SQL paper string. Let me quickly do this. And SQL paper string, for me, I will not use 983 at the moment, so it's super easy to guess all the secrets. If you're willing to try, we add in more secret values. We using SQL paper password here. So SQL paper password is super strong. Delivery password is the same, but we need also this service bus string. So it's a service bus string. It's for the next step that you will be doing, but you need to, but you can set up it right away after the deployment of first container app. So it's 3 secrets here. These secrets would be applied to the Azure. We republish this service, and the next step we would configure the secrets via publishing of this application. One thing, there is a different ways to adjust the secrets and set them up. So essentially what we done just a few seconds ago, it will appear right here. So you can set all secrets from the Azure portal here. And as you can see, there is a bunch of the secrets, but what you should be aware that these secrets have a kind of Kubernetes-like structure. So as you can see, our application is really working now, and it's provide the 404 error. Then we need to deploy the next one and configure secrets there. From the Visual Studio or from the Azure portal, it doesn't matter, as I mentioned before. So it's a tpaper delivery, it's manage container app settings. There is no direct link yet between container apps and Azure Key Vault, but this is something will happen next year. So we're using slightly different secrets. We're using SQL delivery password here, and the value. Then we add in the connection string SQL delivery string, and we add in the server name without 983, but for you it will be your favorite prefix. So it's two secrets, they will be added momentarily, and we will hit the publish and wait a few seconds. And after our deployment is ready, we can observe the results. So we have our container app here. It's a T-paper delivery, and I added the proper URL here for our T-paper orders. And when I'm clicking, when I'm sending request to this endpoint, you can see that accepted EDI message is number 8. So as you can see, the EDI message number is changed every time, because we're saving it to the database and outputting ID. And what we have in the second service, we have delivery controller, and we have a health endpoint here, and we have this endpoint with creation of the messages. So this step is so this action actually concludes the step 5, because it's still a lot of content to ingest. But after this, you will be able to work with your container apps and call them One important point here, that this public URL can be added with internal ingress, so it can be something like this, internal. And if you add this as internal URL for your delivery URL inside the T-paper orders, all traffic between your services would go through the Azure backbone network and not hit the public internet networks. So essentially, you can just add internal here. So it will be like this, and after deployment everything will work as usual. But this is also described in the GitHub repository README, so you can do this by yourself and get back to me if you will have any questions.